Hey team, welcome to episode 128 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path to practice ownership. As a dental student, resident, or new doctor, you've invested years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to practice dentistry. You're likely ready to hit the ground running and start working. But what happens if the unexpected occurs? Unlike other professional careers, a sudden injury or illness can adversely affect your ability to perform your job. You are the person doing the dentistry, and that can impact your income and your loved one's well-being. Insurance is a vital element of protecting your wealth, and while you may be focused on kicking off your career, now is the time to think about securing coverage. No one likes to think about what happens if, but it's important to do so. To talk about all things insurance, I have in the studio today with me, Miss Tara Cain. Tara is an insurance account manager at CWA Risk Solutions, which is Cain Water's in-house insurance agency. Tara comes to the team with 7 years of insurance experience, formerly on the property and casualty side. At CWA Risk Solutions, she plays a significant role in prioritizing education for her clients and helping them navigate their coverage needs. Tara, welcome to Transition Talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So insurance is not something that lots of people like to talk about. It is something that we think about as, oh, we'll get to it, or, oh, I've got to have this for a loan, or because the state makes me have it, depending on the type of coverage. A lot of people kind of automatically think about your former life in the property casualty world because we have to have home insurance and auto insurance because we have loans and mortgages on our homes and cars. But in dentistry, insurance is a vital need for people who are practicing, and their livelihood depends on their hands and their ability to do the work.
Right.
So tell me a little bit, who is Risk Solutions and how does the process work? So let's just start with who is Risk Solutions.
Yeah, of course. And I totally agree. I think there's a lot of distrust in this industry, kind of depending on, I think everyone has their own experience. And I think you were right. People are always thinking of I have to have, my mortgage company is requiring me to have a home insurance policy. The law requires me to have auto, and it just continues. So CWA Risk Solutions is actually the in-house agency of CWA. And so we service all of Cain Water's clients, but we also service doctors, dentists, and students outside of the CWA client base. So really focusing on the dental community mainly, but we're open to helping anyone that might need help.
Awesome. And what kind of policies does CWA Risk Solutions offer? Because clearly there's a million types of insurance out there. What does Risk Solutions do?
We primarily are focused on disability income and business income replacement if you were to become disabled or sick. And then we also do a lot of life insurance. And so those are kind of our main products. But like you said, I am licensed in all lines of business. So we just help navigate and kind of find solutions for our clients outside of those as well if we need.
Awesome. How does the process work, right? If someone's listening in and maybe knows they have a hole in their coverage, or they are maybe a student who is coming up on maybe their third year and is like, okay, I've got to get some coverage in place as I look to kind of enter the world. How does the process work? And is it different for various types of coverage?
Yeah, I think that in the dental community, there's several products that I'd recommend. I think it depends on what stage they are in for their career. But I'd say at a minimum, something that our planning team always talks about this as well, but we really believe in at least having a term life insurance policy, and that will help cover any outstanding debts that you could potentially pass on to your family, and then just offer that additional financial protection. So that is purchasing a life insurance policy that you're going to get for a certain number of years. So if it was a student, I always recommend, at least a 30-year term. It just depends, like if someone's coming to me and maybe they're planning on retiring in 10 years, but they still just want to make sure they're not passing on any of that to their family, then they might take out a 10-year. So it just depends on kind of what stage you are in your life. I always say talk to your insurance advisor if you're having any major life events. So that can include graduation, maybe you're getting married, maybe you had children, anything like that. You're purchasing a practice or you're selling a practice. There's always going to be potential for insurance just to make sure that you're covered and you don't have to deal with any surprises in the future. And then also just for all doctors and dentists, a huge believer in disability insurance. So we recommend applying for as much coverage as you can qualify for. So if I'm speaking to a student, there are limits without having to have proof of income that they can qualify for automatically. And so if it is a practicing doctor, we will look at what their income is, because at the core, these policies are income replacements in the event that someone's disabled or sick or partially disabled. So you're not dependent on on your savings when you're,
not depleting all the money you've saved.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think it just will depend on how much coverage you qualify for based on what they're currently operating at. But I think trying to max that out as much as possible at the time of purchase is going to be ideal.
So if someone's listening right now, student, maybe someone who's graduated and now they're an associate in a practice, they're running their 3 miles a day. They are like tip top shape. They have no family history of anything. And they might say, you know what? I just had a lot of expenses. I've got a lot of student loan debt. I'm not sure I want to afford the cash flow out of what maybe a policy, disability, and or life might cost right now. Like, why would you recommend them look into it now versus maybe in 2, 3, 5 years when maybe they feel now like, okay, maybe it's time for me to start thinking about this and getting my life together?
Right. I totally get that. I didn't graduate college and go straight into the life insurance field. Like you said, I came to the PNC side and I still kick myself for not getting the type of life insurance coverage that I needed at the time. So both of these products are based off of age. That's probably, I would say, one of the biggest factors when they're determining a rate for a policy is going to be the age. And that's so obviously the younger that you are, the cheaper the policy is going to be. So that's pretty self-explanatory. But I think the other thing I like to just express is anything that can happen, as you continue to grow up. So maybe, for me, a good example would be when I turned 27, I just started getting all this neck and back pain. And so I started seeing doctors for it. And I know that if I was to apply for a disability policy right now, they would see that because it's on my medical records and they're going to offer me a policy, but they're going to say, well, we don't want to insure your back, which isn't ideal for especially dentists.
Yeah,
and
100%.
Yeah. And so any type of injuries or sicknesses that you've had or anything that they see on your medical record, and they will see it, the underwriting process for disability policies is pretty extensive. And so I always joke, I'm like, if you sneeze too many times, they're going to be able to see it. And so when you're younger, the likelihood that you haven't had health issues arise it's significantly higher. And so I have helped clients that, maybe they were even, one of my clients was like, I see a chiropractor as a proactive approach to not having back pain. And she wanted to apply for coverage because she just didn't get it when she was, younger. And there was no way we could get our policy without some sort of back exclusion, which just isn't ideal for this world, So when I started taking on this role, I'm like, if I could just help dental students or people in their early stages of their career get the right type of coverage in place early on, that's kind of where my heart's at.
Yeah, because that seems as though even if you get that policy when you're young and maybe it's a lower limit, right? Because you're making less money, but then something happens, you break your arm playing pickleball or something, and now there's some reason you can't get additional coverage. You at least have some safety net as your income grows. Even if you can't get additional coverage, you've got that initial policy that you got, because disability insurance doesn't expire. Is that correct? Like a term policy would?
Correct. Well, it's an income replacement at its core. So the policies I'm typically writing, they're not going to expire, but it's a level premium and they will stay active as long as you pay your premium. So they're non-cancelable contracts to age 67. And then so if you retire earlier, you can just cancel that policy when needed. But in the event that, someone, let's say they become disabled when they're 30 and they have a policy in place that is supposed to last till 67, it doesn't matter when they retire, that policy is going to pay out until they're 67. And then if you don't retire at 67, you can renew it yearly. It's just the premiums aren't going to be that exact premium that
they're going to be a little higher.
Yes, correct. Yeah. It can just change at renewal.
Got it.
But typically we don't usually have a lot of people that need it past 67, but that's just what we write it with.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, there's some distrust in the industry, and I think that's completely true. I always joke on here because from a transition standpoint, brokers are not always the best people or the best groups. There's a lot of good ones out there, but there's also ones that I feel like are just trying to sell a practice. The same is true with insurance, right? Like insurance there's a lot of technicalities, there's a lot of definitions and kind of different types of policies. And so if you're not really educated, you just know you need to go get a life insurance policy. You go and, the guy who is getting, all of his salary based on the commissions he's making from selling you this policy, like how do you know it's the right type of policy? So, and this is specifically important, term policy is a term policy at its core, but like from a disability standpoint, talk to me about some of the things that are very important important for a dentist who's getting a disability policy and things that they need to either make sure they're talking to you about, who's going to be an education source versus a just sell me a policy, or they need to be aware of in their own policies they may already have?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it a lot, especially for new clients that come to CWA. That's something that we have taken time to make sure that our financial planners kind of understand these things, because it absolutely can affect, they can do their planning for a client all day. And then if someone was to become disabled and they don't have proper coverage in place, that's going to change everything. So I work with a lot of new clients where they will come on and the planner will look at their coverage and they're like, there are probably 4 riders that they look for and that I can definitely talk on. And they will usually be like, oh yeah, we want to try to get that policy that has these. So for doctors and dentists, the own occupation rider is probably my biggest one, just because I think that in the event that someone, maybe it was a wrist injury, maybe it was, something that they're not able to use their hands the way that they need to for years, but they like working and they like this industry and they maybe want to go teach, or maybe they still want to still work with patients, but not necessarily like doing consultations, which I think is actually a common thing that people like to do. There's still no question of that income replacement check coming through every month. So when we write it as true ONOC, they're not looking at what type of income. If you have any additional income sources coming in, they are going to allow you to either you can choose not to work and you're still going to receive those benefits, or you can still work and do other jobs.
Yeah. So basically, like, just to make sure I'm clear. So essentially the ONOC rider or provision, or making sure that that's in there, essentially basically says you can go do something else that's not dentistry. And you will still get this dentistry income replacement. So if you want to work the front desk or if you want to go teach, you can earn that income and you will also get this income.
Correct.
Versus if you work and let's say you earn $2,000 a month and your disability is $5,000, now they're only going to pay you $3,000 because you're earning $2,000 elsewhere, even though your premium, I'm assuming historically, has been on that $5,000.
Exactly.
And so there's kind of that mismatch there. So
exactly.
I think that's huge, because I think that the definition of what that means and like those provisions are probably not something a lot of people are paying a lot of attention to unless they have someone guiding them on that.
Yeah. Even it's a rider that even when I'm like working on proposals or finalizing a policy, it's like in the fine lines. You have to know to look for that. There's so many different terms of, it's called the definition of disability. And at Risk Solutions, we don't write any policies outside of the true ONOC. We know how important it is, but it is still like a fine line that even our dentists are like, oh, I just wanted to make sure because my planner said I have to have this. And I'm like, yes, it's there. Yeah. So you have to know to look for it, which again, I understand why there's so much distrust in insurance. They just make it, I don't think they intentionally make it hard, but there's so much they have to put on a policy, declaration or policy issuing page that people don't know what to look for. And these contracts are hundreds of pages, and who has time to do that, So I think trusting an agent in this industry is so important that they're going to do that.
What can someone expect if they're looking at life insurance or disability from you always hear that, okay, now we've got to go like give blood and do a health exam and, expose all the things to someone. What could someone expect, and what are some things to be aware of during kind of that interview process with you? And ultimately, kind of what is underwriting looking for? And I know it will vary. And so caveating that, it's going to vary by carrier and there's all these things, but generally, what can someone expect?
Yeah. If it's any disability or long-term care coverage, I always have that conversation with my clients to expect the full shebang. Like I said, if you went to the doctor when you were 15 for an ear infection, they're going to find that in your medical records. Not that they're going to like talk about it, but they're doing a full review. And then on the disability and long-term care and all of that, there's always going to be, unless you've done one in the past year, they will require an insurance blood and urine test. It's a very specific test where they get to test, like, it's more looking for the probability of things to happen. And so people will say, well, I did blood and urine with my doctor this year. Like, why can't we just use that? And it's
they're testing different things.
They are. Yeah. They're very different tests. They're very specific. So I think it's best to just go into it expecting kind of a lot. And I think one of my clients was laughing. She was like, when I talked to you, it seemed like it was going to be way worse, but most of it's going on in the background. Like, most of that is something like I am working on with underwriting and getting this information. Like, once you sign the application and you submit information, it's mostly going to be like me and my team working in the background. Sometimes they'll have follow-up questions like, hey, like, we did see that you noted that you sometimes have neck pain, but you've never gotten treatment for it or anything like that. Can we just elaborate? But most of it is in the background. And then the testing that they require, and that testing can happen on the life insurance side, which I'll kind of get into, but they can come to your office, they can come to your house. Nowadays, it's not like you're having to go to a doctor's office and get this done. They'll come and they'll do it. It's like a 15-minute appointment. So while it's still, I have to do this additional testing, it is as effortless as it possibly can be. And then so for the life insurance side, it can depend. Again, age is going to be a huge factor, but basically life insurance underwriting will start out by doing that online, like what is available like online for me, Tara Cain. And then they, might see that, yeah, she's been to the doctor a couple times in this past year. So we're probably going to make this kind of a further underwriting process. We're actually going to request full medical records. We're going to request a interview where it's an underwriter that's asking me questions. That's typically what we'll see, especially for people probably under the age of 35. If they have additional underwriting, that's where they will start. And then depending on what the findings are in that interview, that's when they can kind of evaluate if they want to do those additional testing. So people are like, do you think, when I'm talking to them in first stages, they're like, do you think that I'm going to have to do a testing? And I'm like, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Some of them, like I will always do a health review before I write coverage. And that's something also I think is important to note, that it's best to go with an agency because every carrier just views risk very differently. So we have some carriers that they don't care if people are smokers. And we have some that are like, we don't want to insure that and it's going to be so expensive. So starting out with very basic health information. And so sometimes I will do a health review and in my head, I'm like, I'm fully expecting, full underwriting. And then the next day they get the policy offered. And it's because they were really honest on their app and maybe everything just matched their medical records. And they were like, okay, everything looks good. So it just depends, truly.
And this is an important factor, right? Like all of us have gone to the doctor and they've been like, so how many times a week do you drink or like smoke or like, do you run? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're like, yes, I run 3 miles every day, even though you maybe haven't ran since, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
This is not the time to fib. This is not the time to not disclose that you're on some medication or be embarrassed or whatever it might be, because there are records of that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like if you are declined for a policy, that goes on your record as well, right? Which then becomes challenging. Others, that's a black mark of a red flag risk, right? Whatever the reason.
Yeah.
And so be honest.
Yeah. I think lying, that's the biggest one because there's nothing I can do. So if they market, I think they almost even market as insurance fraud and they see that, there's not going to be really, at least any of the carriers I write, maybe, the lower rated carriers might, but if they see that and there's not like a valid explanation as to why something was
excluded.
A question. Yeah, excluded. And I think like the one that I saw, it was like a straight up question that they answered incorrectly. And then the client was like, can you, rewrite me? And I was like, I sadly can't. And it was frustrating for me because obviously we want to help them. And I don't think it was ill intention or anything like that, but they just see that as, well, we don't know what kind of risk we're getting into if you're not going to be honest with us about that.
Yeah.
So yes, I think honesty is key. I tell clients, I'm like, tell me, not more than the carrier, but like try to give me as much information as you possibly can up front because I will try to do things on the back end that's going to make your life easier. Like I'm working on a case right now that she was honest with me and was like, I have a lot of medical history. And before I made her go through this, and it's a disability app, which is, I know, so time consuming. I was like, before we write anything, I've removed her name and removed all of her information. And we have actually been working with underwriters at my carrier to see, like all of my different carriers, to see who's going to offer the best policy. So she's not going through this whole process with one. And if they don't talk to me about their health information and if they're not honest with me at first, then that's not something that we can avoid. And then we get underwriting back and I'm like, man, I wish you would have told me. Like I would have written it with this carrier and we can rewrite it. If it's not denied for excluding, we can move it over. But it's like, one of my clients was like, oh my gosh, we have to start over. And I was like, if you want this much better rate, yes, we do. So
yeah. And I think that's important to understand too, if you're listening, right? Like sometimes people will say, I'm going to shop this policy, right? Is this carrier and this policy, can I get it cheaper elsewhere? And there's really, all else things being equal, ultimately what you're offered with one carrier is going to be the same regardless of the agent, right? Now, clearly, if you have an agent that understands, asks all the questions, is strategic and kind of has a strategy on why they go to certain different carriers. There might be a difference in cost of different carriers, and like your ability to go back to an underwriter and kind of fight, right? And say like, hey, like this clause, or you didn't interpret this correctly. So I think it's important to understand that like the agent you choose makes a difference in not necessarily the rate ultimately that you get, but probably the carrier you go with, which impacts the rate and their ability to kind of make sure that they do it the right way. And so that you can be classified the right way from a term policy perspective, and just getting you with the right coverage that ultimately is doing what you think it's doing.
Yeah. I think even clients I've written, they would be surprised to know like how many phone conversations I've had with underwriting that the client never knew about, because I'm trying to get them as much coverage as possible without, especially on the disability side, without any exclusions, or sometimes even on the life, like they'll be like, oh, we want to, follow up with this or do this. And it's like, I could see that question instead of them going to the client and like, oh, they already gave this to me in their health interview. So I call and I'm like, yeah, so on this date, this is what they told me. And they will be like, okay, great. And move
Trying
that way.
to make it as easy as possible.
Yes. I genuinely like want these policies to be like, if there is a claim, there's no questions asked. That's my ideal situation.
Yeah. So talk to me about, there are these riders, right, that we can add to both disability and life insurance policies. Let's talk about some of those that you think it's important for our listeners to know about as they kind of go in this journey. And clearly we'll kind of share some contact information for you kind of there at the end, but talk about that.
Yeah. So outside of the own occupation, I would say my favorite rider, especially for, I know that you said this is kind of targeted towards students and potentially people that want to purchase a practice someday. So there's a future increase option. The ones that I recommend, they don't expire. So I could write coverage for a dental student where they know, like, obviously they're going to purchase someday, and hopefully their income is going to be very different from year 1 of their career versus year 15 when they purchase into a practice. And so, that big underwriting process that we discussed, and then all those different health factors that can occur, this removes the risk of not being able to secure coverage. So it's set at a limit. I typically start my quotes with either as high as I can go or at least a $10,000 increase option, where they could come to me once their salary has increased or that significant life change happened and say they want to try to increase their policy. So I want to make sure I'm clear. The premium will change when you increase your benefit amount, obviously, but they're not going to come back and do any underwriting besides financial. So they're just going to say, yep, okay, they have this rider. We approved it. Obviously, it could be 10, 15 years ago. We just need their financial underwriting. And so we'll submit their proof of income, and then they'll reissue the policy for that higher limit. So I think that's a huge benefit.
It's huge because, I mean, like, again, as we sit here, we never know what the future is going to bring. And so enabling yourself to get additional coverage without additional health screening, when you know your income is going to continue to increase the longer you're able to practice. I mean, theoretically, that's what we're all hoping is important. So if you're listening, make sure you're kind of thinking ahead, right? And not being reactive, be proactive about this.
I remember the planners at CWA were actually kind of shocked how not cheap. I don't think anything on the disability side is necessarily like considered a cheap policy, but it is for the value that you are getting. Like if you know your income is going to increase, it is very cost efficient. So that's one of my favorite ones for sure.
What about student loans?
Yes, student loans are also my other one. So obviously the goal is to replace your income, but that's not maybe accounting for your loan. And I think you can add, and so it will depend on how much you have left and how many years. But the idea is if you were to become disabled, again, that income is just going to that income replacement, so the disability claim. And then if you add the student loan rider, they're actually going to increase that monthly benefit by however much you had coverage for. If you were disabled for 15 years and you had 5 years left of your student loan, it's going to add that additional coverage on during the duration of your loan. So it's just another nice, oh, okay, so I'm getting this disability check and I don't have to even send that to my dental school that I'm still paying. That's a separate entity, and that's really, really recommended for students.
That's amazing.
I love it. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're listening, and this happens often, buyers who are our clients, when you're buying a practice, hopefully this is not your first episode of Transition Talk, but there's a lot that goes into buying a practice. There's a lot of cost. There's a lot of to-dos. There's a lot of money that's going out the door, both in like purchasing the practice, but setting up new services. And I'm sure a lot of you want to update the practice or do something new. And it's a lot of outflow. And so a lot of feedback we get from buyers when they're buying into their first practice, they go to a bank and the bank says, okay, we need you to have these specific policies. A lot of times it's like property and casualty. It's like liability and malpractice. Some of them, depending on the size, will require business overhead or something to protect the loan or a life insurance policy. And some people just use what they have. Like if they have a life insurance policy, they'll just assign it over. Clearly, long term, not the best idea because now your loan is protected, but you personally are not protected, which is the ultimate goal. And so I know a lot of the feedback you get is, I just have too much on my plate right now and I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
Right. And what they don't understand is then they're going to own the practice and life is just going to keep trucking and they're not going to have really there's never a good time to sit down and probably do this. And so if you're listening, my advice from being someone who is lucky enough to help you buy a practice, but then also to see these people as they come through Cain Waters or they just touch base with us and kind of check in and let us know how their practice is going. Luckily we don't have a lot of stories, but there are stories where someone has an event and, they were not prepared for it, or they own a huge practice and they pass away and they didn't have the proper life insurance, right? And these are tragic events. These are not someone who practiced till they were 70 and then passed away. These are people who never anticipated this thing happening to them. So my advice, and I'm sure Tara, you would echo this, and it seems like that's what you said this whole episode, is get the coverage now. Like do the things now. It seems like a lot, but you will be set up and you will be in a better spot, both financially, even though it seems like a lot of outflow right now. Financially, you're going to be in a better place. You're going to have more efficient and cheaper, quote, quote, cheaper coverage now than you will 5 years from now. And so just a really great investment in your future and protecting the wealth that you're creating, right? Like, if you're buying a practice, we always joke that your net worth is negative because you have a lot of debt, not a lot of assets, but ultimately you're buying a practice for the benefit of ownership and the benefit of those cash flows with the ability to kind of harvest that cash and create wealth. And so insurance, while a commodity and something no one wants to think about, is really a way to protect that wealth.
Yeah. I was listening to a disability lecture and I loved what they were talking about. They're like, people are so comfortable doing life insurance and home and auto, but it's all of those things and your assets that you have that comes from your income. So protecting your income is obviously so important. And I know that the process to purchase these policies is extensive and I get it. We'll be with you every step of the way. But I think, like you said, it's just so important to do that today. I have one more just experience where one of my clients, she actually said that she was going to hold off on doing the disability process because it wasn't required for her loan and asked me to follow up with her in April. And I think her business, she purchased into the practice in November. So I called and then she told me that she had a major diagnosis and I know she's not insurable now. I hate that in general, obviously, but then adding that component where now, she has this amazing practice she just purchased. And now she's like, oh, if something happens financially. Yeah, exactly. When people are like, when should I buy life insurance? When should I buy disability? I'm like, today.
Yeah.
As soon as you can. That's my piece of advice.
100%. Well, I love that. I think that's a good note for us to end on. Basically, get it early, be educated, really kind of work with someone who, I know I've heard you say this, if you have a policy in place and Tara looks at it, she will also just tell you it's a great policy.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you need.
I won't replace a policy. If it's good and has everything that they need, I will not replace it. I won't even try because I want this to be as cheap as possible and I want them to get the best policy as possible.
Yeah, awesome. And so just like everything else in the transition world, you've heard me say this a million times, let's communicate, let's get things, let's be proactive, and let's educate ourselves in what we need in this insurance space. Tara, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And sharing all your knowledge about insurance. It's definitely not one of the light and fluffy topics, but it's definitely an important one. Listeners, Tara and CWA Risk Solutions are here to help you simplify the insurance process and help you understand what coverage is right for you. You can always reach out to our team at NDP. We'll get you connected with Tara. We also have a link that we can share on our resources page to their page that will help. And there's a quote form on there. So another way to get connected with her. And so thanks so much for joining us. And that's all we have for today, team. Thanks for joining us on episode 128. As always, make sure to share the transition love with those who may not know of us yet. And of course, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, friends.